former President Trump's selection of JD Vance as his running mate, raising questions about U.S. funding for the war on Ukraine. The freshman Ohio senator among the harshest critics of American support of that war, writing in an April New York Times op-ed that he remains opposed to more funding. So what political and economic consequences could this hold moving forward? Joining us now to discuss the implications of this November's election on the future of this war, we have former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Ambassador Taylor, it's amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. So just help our audience, primarily rooted here in the States, understand if funding were to be pulled from Ukraine. Obviously, there's a moral question here, but what could the economic impact be for Americans listening to this conversation?
So it is very clear that U.S. support for Ukraine is allowing it to defend itself and indeed to defend Europe and defend us from the Russians. The Russians have invaded Ukraine. The Ukrainians are trying to hold back the Russians, push them back out of their country. What we're doing is supporting the Ukrainians as they do that. And that is that's been a major effort. And there's no doubt it's been costly, it's been expensive. It's been probably 5% of our defense budget. 5% of our defense budget is what we're providing to the Ukrainians in terms of the military support. So there is a cost to this, but for 5% of the defense budget, the Ukrainians are holding back one of our two major enemies.
Talk to us a little bit more, Ambassador, about the economic implications of this, just given the fact how critical this is from a foreign policy perspective. If we do see any sort of fallout, if we do see a shift in the administration come November, just how the risk that might impose here when it comes to foreign relations and specifically the relationship with Ukraine and then also with Russia.
Well, if we, as I say, we need to support, in my view, we need to support Ukraine as they hold off the Russians. Economically, that means that we are going to benefit from a more stable world community, a world security environment, if the Russians can be prohibited, defended against, pushed back out of Ukraine. The Russians are now trying to upend the order. They're trying to upend the security, the international order that gives us the ability to invest, that gives us the ability to grow. The Russians are trying to disbase that, to change that, to make that a very different order in which big countries can invade small countries. So it's important for our development, our growth, our security that the Ukrainians win and the Russians lose.
I want to talk more specifically about the potential impact of the 2024 election. The market is certainly pricing in a win for former President Trump. Obviously, you have had your own interfacing and relationship with the former president. What do you think is the potential biggest risk from your perspective if Trump does enter office again come November?
Well, I think it's hard to say. You've already indicated what the vice presidential designee, JD Vance, has to say about Ukraine. He's opposed the assistance, but the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, got the at least implicit support of former President Trump to pass that $61 billion defense bill, support bill. For Ukraine. So the majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate, the bipartisan majority in the House and the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, the strong support of the American people. So there is that support going forward, and we'll have to see what the new administration, if there is a new administration, would put forward. We don't know the outcome yet, of course, and we're not really sure what the new policy would be if there were to be a change in Washington.
And also top of mind for officials down in Washington, companies at large, is the rising cybersecurity risk and ultimately what that means, not only from a government perspective, but what it means for private companies. And the list goes on. I'm curious what we've learned or the lessons that we've learned from the Russia-Ukraine war and maybe what that signals in terms of the need to strengthen our fight or ability to contain some of that cybersecurity risk going forward.
Well, it is very interesting that there have been small attacks, small cyber attacks, more of Russians against Ukrainians. But the Russians apparently recognize that any cyber attack on the West, in particular the United States, would result in a devastating response. So we haven't seen that. Now, what that says is we need to maintain those defenses. We need to be able to take the offensive if the Russians were to make a mistake and launch a cyber attack against us. They need to know that they will pay a bigger price. We need to be able to deter the Russians from doing any of that kind of action.
All right, Ambassador William Taylor, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.